Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Radical Moderate. Today we're diving into a big question. Is democracy only as good as the people who vote in it? Let's unpack it. Winston Churchill once joked that the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. He wasn't trying to insult anyone, he was pointing to a paradox. Democracy depends on the wisdom of its citizens and is also vulnerable to their ignorance. We tend to take the one person, one vote as an almost sacred democratic principle. It feels fair, egalitarian, and morally right. But fairness doesn't always equal wisdom. And that tension goes all the way back to the ancient Athens, the birthplace of democracy itself. Plato, who lived through the Athenian democracy, saw this problem firsthand. He described democracy as a system where politicians indulge citizens' desires, the way a sweet shop owner indulges children's desires. People vote for whatever brings them immediate pleasure, not necessarily what's good for them, or for the society as a whole. And in Plato's view, that's how democracies eventually decay, through the tyranny of short-term thinking by the majority. He really had a reason to be skeptical. His teacher, Socrates, was sentenced to death by a majority vote. Condemned not by villains, but by an uninformed crowd swayed by emotions and rhetoric, instead of reason. That experience left Plato deeply suspicious of the so-called wisdom of crowds. He realized that numbers alone don't guarantee good decisions. The quality of the minds casting those votes matters just as much as their quantity. Now, the Athenian system did have voting restrictions. Voting was limited to male citizens of Athenian birth, usually over the age of 18. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded entirely from voting, and property and class could affect one's political influence. In other words, their democracy was far from universal. It was a citizens' rich boys club built on status and birthright. And those reasons are, of course, unacceptable today. But the underlying concern that not everyone has the knowledge or the context to make informed decisions is still relevant. So maybe the question isn't who vote based on gender, class, or race, but how prepared each voter is to participate in shaping the society. In the modern context, instead of those old exclusionary variables, we might consider something more meaningful, like a basic civic knowledge requirement. This obviously came up in the recent presidential election. Now, imagine a short, bipartisan, constitution-based civics test that ensures every voter understands the foundations of government, the structures of power, and the long-term responsibilities of citizenship and governance. Not to exclude people, but to empower them to participate. Because when voters understand how the system works, they're less likely to be manipulated by politicians, offering impossible promises or short-term fixes that corrode the society in the long run. So here's the twist. Instead of restricting voting by birth, class, or wealth, we could potentially strengthen democracy by deepening civic understanding. It's not about elitism, it's about making sure that everyone who votes knows what they're voting for and what the consequences are of this voting. I mean, some people fear that this kind of system could create a hierarchy of voters. But maybe the opposite is true. It could create a society where every vote is equally informed at a fundamental, minimal competency level. And every citizen is equally empowered that way. Is this a perfect solution? No, by all means it's not, okay? But it's better than the alternative we have now, where the vote of an informed citizen is oftentimes canceled or diluted by another that decides based on the familiarity of a candidate's name on the voting ballot, or whatever empty promises a candidate may make that is unsustainable in the long run. Plato warned that democracies fall when the crowd is easily swayed by flattery and impulse. And perhaps the radical moderate answer to that problem is simple. We don't need fewer voters. We need wiser ones. Because the health of a democracy doesn't depend on how many voices are heard, but how well those voices understand the long-term consequences of what they are saying. Thanks so much for watching, folks, and as always, let's keep the conversation going, all right? So see you in the next video on The Radical Moderate.